Rachel Harrison was a devoted wife, a loving mother, and the face of suburban perfection until her secret affair with 19-year-old Kyle Tanner shattered everything. When her husband was found brutally murdered in their own kitchen, the quiet neighborhood of Maple Glen was left asking, was it a crime of passion, or a cold-blooded plan disguised as love? Maple Glen was the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever seemed out of place. It was a small, tightly knit community just outside the city, filled with neat driveways, kids on bicycles, and neighbors who waved to each other from their front lawns. People chose Maple Glen for its safety, its charm, and the feeling that danger belonged elsewhere. But beneath the calm exterior of Birchwood Drive, something was quietly unraveling. Rachel Harrison had lived there with her husband Mark and their 2 children for nearly 10 years. At 39, she lived what many would consider an ideal life. She stayed home to care for the kids, volunteered at the school, and was often seen tending to her rose bushes on sunny afternoons. Her husband Mark was dependable, though rarely home before dinner. His long hours at a downtown accounting firm paid the bills and allowed Rachel to focus on maintaining their home. From the outside, their life seemed perfect. But Rachel felt invisible, stuck in a routine that left her feeling hollow. Just next door lived the Tanners, who had moved in only 2 years earlier. Their son, Kyle, had just turned 19. He had recently come back home after dropping out of college halfway through his first year. His return stirred whispers in the neighborhood, mostly from parents who worried about his attitude and appearance. But Kyle didn't care. He spent most of his days lounging around the house, playing music too loud, or wandering the streets with no clear purpose. He had the kind of charm that drew attention, though not always the right kind. He was tall, lean, and carried himself with a kind of careless confidence that made people take notice, especially Rachel. It started out harmless. A wave from the porch. A smile when he offered to carry groceries inside. A few casual conversations while Mark was at work. Over time, those moments began to linger. Rachel found herself looking for excuses to see him. Offering leftover cookies. Asking him to help with small chores her husband never had time for. Kyle, quick to notice, played along. He flirted subtly, pushing boundaries with quiet ease. And Rachel didn't stop him. The tension between them grew with every encounter. To Rachel, Kyle represented something thrilling and forbidden, a reminder that she was still desired, still seen. To Kyle, she was an escape from boredom, an adult who treated him like more than just a kid. What began as innocent interactions slowly turned into something else entirely. There was a charge in the air when they were near each other, a silent agreement neither of them spoke aloud. But it didn't take long before that silence turned into action. As summer rolled in and Mark's long office hours kept him away, the opportunity for secrets began to grow. Rachel's days shifted. Her routine changed. She started locking her phone, dressing differently, acting distant around the house. Mark noticed, but only in passing. In Maple Glen, the streets remained quiet, and the neighbors kept smiling. No one suspected that something dark was about to unfold just beyond those neatly trimmed hedges. The affair began quietly, almost like an unspoken agreement between 2 people craving attention for different reasons. Rachel welcomed Kyle into her life the way one might let in a breeze through a half-open window, not with intention, but with curiosity. At first, they only saw each other in the safety of daylight hours. Kyle would visit under the pretense of helping with chores, carrying in groceries, fixing a squeaky door, watering plants while Mark was at work. But those small tasks soon turned into longer visits, deeper conversations, and lingering touches. They began meeting when no one was around. In the middle of the day. On weekends when Mark took the kids to soccer practice or ran errands, Rachel felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. Kyle was younger, unpredictable, and bold. He made her laugh. He listened. He saw her as something more than a housewife trapped in repetition. To Kyle, Rachel was an escape. She gave him a sense of power and validation. He had no job, no direction, and little respect from his own parents. But with Rachel, he felt in control. The two became reckless. They stopped caring. Who might notice? They kissed in dim corners of the backyard. They sent messages late at night. They used Rachel's home as their meeting place, trusting the locked doors and predictable routines to shield them from discovery. Rachel's relationship with her husband grew cold. She stopped trying to hide her disinterest. Her excuses for being out of the house multiplied. She took more solo drives, stayed out shopping longer than necessary, and erased her call history with meticulous care. Mark was puzzled, but not suspicious. He blamed her behavior on midlife boredom or stress. Kyle's parents noticed changes too. Their son had grown more confident, more secretive. They questioned him, but Kyle brushed them off. He was always good at lying. Their affair intensified quickly. Within weeks, Kyle was convinced that what they had was real. He began talking about a future with Rachel. He wanted her to leave Mark. He imagined moving away, starting over, just the two of them. But Rachel was unsure. The reality of ending her marriage, breaking up her family, and facing the judgment of her neighbors terrified her. Kyle didn't understand her hesitation. He had fallen for her, and he didn't like being told to wait. That tension became a slow-burning fuse. Kyle's messages grew more emotional, more desperate. He asked to see her more often, demanded that she make a decision. Rachel, afraid of losing control, tried to pull back. But it was too late. Kyle had tasted what it was like to have her, and he wasn't going to let go easily. The danger was no longer just the affair, it was the way it changed them both. Rachel had crossed a line, and Kyle had become something unstable. Their relationship, once exciting, had turned into something darker. In a quiet neighborhood where everyone thought they knew their neighbors, no one noticed the storm building behind closed doors. But soon, the truth would surface, and it would come with blood. Kyle's obsession deepened with every passing day. What began as a thrill had turned into fixation. He texted Rachel constantly, asking where she was, who she was with, and when he could see her again. When she didn't reply quickly, he grew anxious and angry. His emotions shifted rapidly. One moment he was pleading, the next he was accusing. Rachel, overwhelmed by the pressure and the growing risk of being discovered, tried to slow things down. She told Kyle they needed space, that things were moving too fast. But her words only pushed him further over the edge. Kyle began showing up at her house uninvited. He watched from his bedroom window, studying her routine, waiting for moments when Mark was away. He became possessive, questioning every interaction she had, even the most innocent ones. Rachel started to feel cornered. What once felt exciting now filled her with dread. She couldn't focus, couldn't sleep, and lived in constant fear that Kyle would do something reckless. Her fear wasn't misplaced. One evening, Mark returned home earlier than usual after an office meeting was cancelled. The house was quiet, but something felt off. He checked the kitchen, the living room, then the security camera installed in the entryway, a feature he had added months ago and rarely used. As he scrolled through the footage, he stopped cold. There, on the screen, was Kyle entering the house just hours earlier, while Mark was still at work. The timestamp left no doubt. He had used the spare key hidden under the flower pot, the one only family and close friends knew about. Furious and confused, Mark confronted Rachel. That night, the house shook with shouting. Neighbors heard the argument through thin walls and open windows. Though no one knew the details, everyone sensed something serious had happened. Rachel broke down and confessed. Not everything, but enough for Mark to piece together the betrayal. The affair, the lies, the deception, it hit him all at once. That night changed everything. The next day, Rachel told Kyle it was over. She begged him to move on, to forget what had happened between them. She said it had been a mistake. But Kyle didn't believe her. He accused her of using him, of playing with his emotions. In his mind, Mark was the obstacle. If Mark were gone, they could finally be together without guilt or secrets. 2 nights later, just after midnight, a 911 call shattered the silence of Birchwood Drive. A neighbor, awakened by screams, reported a break-in. When officers arrived, they found the front door ajar and the kitchen lights still on. Inside, Mark Harrison lay lifeless in a pool of blood. He had been stabbed multiple times. Rachel was found on the floor with minor injuries and a dazed expression. She told police that an intruder had broken in, attacked her husband, and left her unconscious. But something didn't add up. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen. And Kyle Tanner was nowhere to be found. Detectives arrived at the Harrison residence just before dawn, the crime scene already buzzing with officers and forensics teams. The neighborhood was in shock. Maple Glen had never seen anything like this. A violent murder in the middle of the night didn't fit the image of the quiet, suburban community. The investigators immediately began piecing together what had happened. Starting with Rachel's account of the night. She claimed a masked intruder had broken into the house, attacked her husband, and knocked her unconscious during the struggle. But the scene raised questions from the start. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no picked locks, and the back door was still secured from the inside. Nothing had been stolen. Mark's wallet, phone, and watch were all untouched. On the kitchen counter, there were no muddy footprints, no glove prints, no evidence suggesting a stranger had slipped in unnoticed. What investigators did find were fingerprints on the knife used in the murder. Two sets stood out, Mark's and Kyle Tanner's. When detectives checked the Harrisons' home security footage, more answers began to surface. Though some cameras had been disabled, suspicious in itself, one angle from the side yard captured a blurry figure entering the house around 11:40 p.m. The silhouette, though unclear, matched Kyle's build and clothing from earlier that week. Rachel's phone records revealed frequent calls and messages to Kyle over the past few months, many late at night. Interviews with neighbors confirmed sightings of Kyle around the house on multiple occasions when Mark wasn't home. A statewide manhunt was issued for Kyle Tanner, who had vanished overnight. His parents hadn't seen or heard from him. His phone was off, and his car was missing. 3 days later, authorities found the vehicle abandoned near a wooded area, 30 miles away. Inside were food wrappers, a sleeping bag, and a blood-stained hoodie. A trail led investigators to an abandoned cabin where Kyle was hiding, disheveled and clearly unstable. He surrendered without resistance. In custody, Kyle gave a chilling confession. He admitted to killing Mark but insisted it hadn't been his idea. According to Kyle, Rachel had been planning it for weeks. She told him that divorce wasn't an option, that Mark would take the kids and ruin her reputation. Kyle claimed she manipulated him, promising a life together if he could just get rid of the problem. He said the plan was simple: enter the house late at night using the hidden key, make it look like a break-in, and escape unnoticed. Rachel, when confronted with Kyle's statements, denied everything. She claimed Kyle had become obsessed and violent after she ended the affair. She said he must have snapped when she refused to see him again. With no hard evidence linking her directly to the planning, prosecutors struggled to build a case against her. She was not arrested. Kyle, on the other hand, was charged with first-degree murder. The trial drew national attention. The story of a housewife's affair with a teenager and the deadly consequences that followed captivated the public. But for detectives, one question remained unanswered: was Kyle telling the truth about Rachel's role, or was he twisting the story to avoid taking full responsibility? Kyle Tanner's trial began 6 months after the murder, and the courtroom was packed on the first day. The prosecution presented a straightforward case: a young man, rejected by his lover, had committed a brutal act of violence in a fit of rage. They showed the jury the evidence, security footage, fingerprint analysis, the bloody clothes, and the weapon that tied Kyle to the scene. His confession sealed it further. But the real intrigue came from what Kyle insisted from the very beginning: he hadn't acted alone. According to him, Rachel Harrison had orchestrated everything. Kyle took the stand during the trial, his demeanor calm but emotional. He described in detail how Rachel had manipulated him, told him stories of abuse, and planted the idea that there was no way out of her marriage except through death. He claimed she had coached him on what to wear, when to come, and how to avoid being caught. He admitted to doing the killing, but said it was never just his plan. It was their plan. Rachel, sitting in the courtroom each day, remained stoic. She refused to speak to the media, declined interviews, and stayed mostly silent even when privately questioned. Her legal team continued to maintain her innocence. There was no digital trail proving she had asked Kyle to commit the murder. No written message. No audio recording. Only his word against hers. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before finding Kyle guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But even after sentencing, the story didn't end. Whispers about Rachel's involvement continued. Though she was never charged, she was branded in the eyes of the public as the woman who had gotten away with murder. Her reputation shattered. The neighbors she once greeted now avoided her. Her children were removed from her custody temporarily during the investigation and later went to live with Mark's sister in another state. The Harrison home was sold quietly, the new owners unaware of the dark history it carried. Rachel moved out of Maple Glen and vanished from public life, her name becoming a cautionary tale whispered in news forums and true crime podcasts. Years passed with no developments until an anonymous letter arrived at the local police department. It contained details about the murder that had never been released to the public, the exact location of the spare key, the specific words Rachel supposedly used to convince Kyle, and even a sketch of the kitchen layout. The handwriting was unrecognizable, and there were no fingerprints on the envelope. Despite renewed interest, the letter did not lead to an arrest. Without a way to verify its source, it was filed away as another piece of unsolved evidence in an already closed case. To this day, questions remain. Was Kyle a manipulated victim, or was he trying to drag Rachel down with him? Did she truly plan the murder, or was she simply reckless enough to invite disaster? The truth may never be known. But in the shadows of suburbia, one thing became clear: behind the calmest doors can live the darkest secrets.